Hello, my name is Lisa. I'm 68 years old, and I want to share a moment that changed everything for me. At a dinner with my husband's partners, he looked at me with disdain and said, "I'll be embarrassed if you come with me. You know nothing about business." I felt crushed, humiliated, and invisible. That night, instead of letting his words define me, I focused on something I loved and quietly began building it into something more. 6 months later, I faced him again. But this time, everything had changed. The little venture I had poured my heart into had grown beyond what I ever imagined, reaching $1 million in revenue. The shock on his face when he realized what I had accomplished is something I will never forget. But how did a simple kitchen hobby turn into such a success? Who helped me achieve this? And what obstacles did I have to overcome along the way? The full story is far more surprising and emotional than it seems. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now, let's discover how this story really began. Tonight, I find myself facing a quiet terror I thought I had left behind decades ago. Richard, my husband of 35 years, is downstairs, getting ready for a dinner with his business partners at one of the city's most prestigious clubs. The thought alone should excite me. Dinners like these used to fill him with pride, and I used to think we would share those moments together. But tonight, my heart is a knot of unease as I smooth out the navy blue dress I had picked hours ago, feeling the fabric slip over my shoulders and down my body. It's a dress that I thought would make me feel elegant, poised, like the woman I still want to be, not just the wife who quietly observes life passing by. I step into the foyer, adjusting my necklace, taking a breath, ready to meet him. He stands there, cufflinks catching the soft glow of the chandelier. For a moment, I think he might smile. But then he looks at me, briefly, and something in his gaze makes me pause. "Actually, Lisa," he says, voice smooth but cold, "I think it's better if you don't come tonight." The words hit me like a sudden chill. My stomach drops. "What do you mean?" I ask, trying to keep my voice steady, but I can feel the tremor betraying my fear. "These are important people," he continues, avoiding my eyes as if my presence were a shadow in the room. "We'll be discussing investments and market trends. I'll be embarrassed if you come with me. You don't know anything about business." I feel the words lodge in my chest like a stone. Embarrassment, humiliation, invisibility. The familiar ache of being underestimated rises, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. They just wait quietly, ready to sting again. "Richard, I'm your wife," I whisper, almost hoping he'll hear the desperation and love woven into that simple declaration. He tilts his head slightly, a sneer flickering across his face. "Exactly. Stay home, Lisa. Watch your cooking shows or whatever." And with that, he turns and leaves, the door clicking softly behind him. The silence that follows is suffocating, filled with the echoes of a life I didn't realize had been quietly shrinking around me. I stand there, alone, in the dim light of the foyer, staring at the reflection in the mirror. Tears prick at the corners of my eyes, blurring the familiar lines of my face. When did I stop mattering? When did my presence become optional? The sadness is quickly replaced by a strange flicker of anger, one I haven't felt in decades. It bubbles quietly, then grows, a warmth in my chest that demands recognition. I won't allow myself to be invisible anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. Just then the phone rings and the voice of my neighbor Ruth cuts through the quiet. "Lisa? I saw Richard leave alone. Are you okay?" Her concern wraps around me like a soft blanket, a lifeline in the storm of emotions. I wipe my tears, forcing myself to stand a little taller. "Ruth," I say, my voice steadier than I feel. "Remember that soap-making hobby we talked about? Let's turn it into a real business." Her pause is brief, then warmth and excitement pour through her words. Lisa, are you serious? That's amazing. We can do it. I know we can. The decision to act feels like a small rebellion, a reclaiming of the self I had lost somewhere in the routine of marriage, the years of being seen as invisible, the endless compromises. I realize that for the first time in a long while, I feel a pulse of hope, tentative but insistent. It's the first spark of a fire I didn't know I still had inside me. I move to the kitchen, where the scent of lavender and herbs still clings faintly from the soaps I had made last week. Ruth arrives shortly after, carrying a notebook filled with ideas she'd scribbled down during our earlier conversations. We spend hours talking, laughing softly as we remember old recipes, sketching out what could become something real. There's a rhythm in our movements, a quiet joy in collaboration, a feeling of purpose I haven't known in years. As the night deepens and the house grows quiet, I realize that this connection, this creation, is exactly what I needed. Richard's dismissal still stings, sharp and cutting, but it no longer paralyzes me. The humiliation he aimed at me has, instead, become fuel. I will prove, not to him but to myself, that my life is not defined by his opinions, or by anyone else's for that matter. I take a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment. I am not the woman he dismissed tonight. I am someone who still has dreams, someone capable of growth, resilience, and reinvention. And with Ruth by my side, I finally feel that the years behind me are not a chain. They are a foundation, solid and waiting to bear the weight of something extraordinary. Tonight, as the city hums outside our windows, I make a vow to myself. I will rise quietly, methodically, with courage, ingenuity, and heart. The world may not have seen my worth yet, but I will show it. One small bar of soap at a time, one determined step at a time. The next morning, sunlight streamed gently through the kitchen windows, illuminating the faint lavender haze lingering from yesterday's late-night soap-making session. The air was fragrant, almost soothing, and yet there was an undercurrent of something more potent, determination, a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt in decades. Ruth was already there, her eyes bright and eager, flipping through the worn pages of her grandmother's recipe book as though it were a sacred text. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth grounding me, and watched her as she traced her finger over the faded lines, murmuring measurements and techniques under her breath. "I think if we combine this lavender with chamomile," she said, looking up with a small, conspiratorial smile, "we can make something gentle enough for sensitive skin, but rich enough to feel luxurious." Her excitement was contagious. I felt a thrill as I realized we were no longer just tinkering with a hobby. We were inventing, crafting, shaping something that belonged entirely to us. We spread out jars of oils, dried flowers, and powdered clays across the counter. There was a rhythm to our movements, almost meditative, the scooping, the mixing, the careful folding of ingredients. I noticed my hands moving with a purpose I had almost forgotten. The meticulousness, the tactile engagement, it made me feel alive. "Do you think people will notice the difference?" I asked, a hint of insecurity threading my tone. Ruth laughed softly, a sound that was both comforting and inspiring. "Lisa, people notice care. That's the magic we're selling, not just soap. You put love into it, and it shows. Trust me." We worked late into the morning, sketching logos, scribbling ideas for packaging, and debating the shape of the bars. I caught myself smiling for the first time that day, the tension from yesterday's humiliation melting, replaced by something tender yet fierce, a spark of hope, fragile but insistent. And then Richard appeared at the doorway, his posture stiff, his face a mask of disapproval. "Still playing with your little hobby?" he asked, his voice sharp, almost dismissive, as though our entire morning of labor were inconsequential. I felt a familiar ache rise in my chest, a reminder of years spent shrinking to fit his expectations. I wanted to snap, to scream, to tell him that our little project was about more than hobby or triviality. It was about reclaiming ourselves, but instead, I simply smiled politely. "Yes, Richard," I said softly. "Just a little hobby for now." He gave a short, derisive laugh and strode out the door, leaving the kitchen in a brief silence. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, savoring the faint triumph of ignoring his judgment. We had begun something small, yes, but it belonged to us, and that mattered far more than his approval. Our first real test came on a bright Saturday at the local farmers market. My stomach fluttered nervously as we set up our little booth. The pastel-colored bars, neatly stacked and tied with twine, looked charming enough, but I could feel the doubt creeping in at the edges of my excitement. Would anyone care? Would anyone notice the care we had poured into each batch? A mother with tired eyes approached, her little girl's arms wrapped protectively around her. She picked up a bar of soap, inhaling the scent, and smiled faintly. "My daughter has eczema," she said softly, almost shyly. "We've tried everything. I just don't know if this will help." I knelt slightly to meet her gaze, letting warmth and reassurance guide my words. "We made these with gentle ingredients, nothing harsh. I hope they help, and if not, we'll learn from it and try again." Her eyes glistened, and she held the soap to her chest. These helped her. You're a lifesaver." Her words hit me like a wave. I felt a tight knot in my throat, a mixture of pride, relief, and a long-forgotten sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely useful. The memory of being dismissed by Richard faded, replaced by the quiet affirmation that we could create something meaningful with our hands and hearts. The day passed in a blur of introductions, smiles, and small but significant victories. By the afternoon, we had sold every bar we brought, making $340 in a single day. I remember counting the money with Ruth, our laughter mingling with disbelief. Each coin, each dollar, was not just profit, it was proof that we had begun to matter again, that our work resonated beyond the walls of my kitchen. We reinvested every dollar immediately, buying better oils, more vibrant clays, and delicate yet simple packaging that reflected our care. Every small improvement became a symbol of our dedication, our commitment to doing something well, even if the world around us dismissed us as old ladies playing house. 3 months passed, and the sales steadily grew, reaching $2,000 a month. Ruth, ever the visionary, noticed the potential for expansion. "Lisa," she said one afternoon, eyes gleaming, "there's a suppliers fair in Chicago next week. We could find better prices on raw materials, maybe discover something new. It could change everything." I felt a flicker of fear, of risk, of stepping into the unknown, but it was quickly replaced by exhilaration. Without telling Richard, I booked 2 tickets to Chicago, a secret pulse of excitement beating in my chest. What if this was the start of something real, something that could no longer be dismissed or diminished? That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of the young mother and her daughter, the small triumph of selling out our first market batch, and the scent of lavender still clinging faintly to my hair. The humiliation of yesterday felt like a distant shadow, one that now fueled my determination rather than diminishing me. I realized that beginning small didn't mean thinking small. It meant starting a journey, brick by brick, with courage and heart, and trusting that growth would come. For the first time in years, I slept with a quiet smile, imagining the road ahead, a road lined with possibilities, learning, and the rekindling of a self I had thought lost. Ruth's laughter echoed softly in my mind, a reminder that companionship and belief could ignite the tiniest spark into a brilliant flame. Our small beginning was more than a hobby now. It was a promise, fragile and beautiful, that we were no longer invisible. Chicago greeted us with a roar. The suppliers' fair was a maze of color, sound, and movement, each corner buzzing with people hustling, pitching, and demonstrating products. The air was thick with a mixture of scents, essential oils, fresh paper, polished wood, and the low hum of constant conversation created a tide we struggled to swim against. Ruth and I clutched our small table like tiny lifeboats in an ocean of commerce. The fare was overwhelming, disorienting, and exhilarating all at once. We were two small fish in a vast, merciless sea, trying to find our rhythm, our voice, and our place. Our modest collection of soaps sat neatly on a corner of the table, wrapped in twine and labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. The lavender and chamomile bars seemed almost fragile against the towering displays of industrial machinery, towering shelving of wholesale oils, and polished corporate booths boasting glossy brochures and bright LED screens. I felt a pang of insecurity. Who were we? Two older women making soaps in a kitchen among the giants of the wellness industry. My hands brushed against the edges of the bars, grounding myself in their familiar texture, seeking courage in what I had made with care. As I adjusted a stack of soaps, a man approached, his presence calm but commanding. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, yet there was an approachability in his smile that made him seem less like a corporate titan and more like a person genuinely interested. He paused, inhaling deeply over a bar of chamomile soap, and I felt my stomach twist in nervous anticipation. "These are remarkable," he said, voice smooth but sincere. "The texture, the scent, it's perfect. What's your production capacity?" I laughed nervously, the sound high-pitched and uncertain, betraying my own doubts. "We make them in my kitchen, sir. We're very small," I admitted, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. His eyes crinkled at the corners in understanding, not judgment. "I see," he said thoughtfully. "And yet, there's something here, something rare." "I'm Michael Chen," he continued, extending a hand, which I shook with a mixture of awe and humility. "I own several wellness brands. Your product is exceptional, and more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You genuinely care about your customers. I saw it in the way you spoke to people just now, the attention you gave each person who approached your table." Ruth and I exchanged a glance, a silent conversation of disbelief, hope, and cautious excitement passing between us. Could someone really see beyond the smallness of our operation to the heart and soul behind it? Could our dedication, our care, truly matter to someone in a world that prized scale and speed above all else? He reached into his pocket and handed me a sleek, professional card. The weight of it felt heavier than I expected, like a promise, a lifeline, or perhaps a challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. "I'd like to discuss this further," he said. "I want to invest in your company. Not just money, I want to mentor you, teach you the ropes, and help you grow beyond what you've already accomplished." I stared at him, stunned. My mind whirled with disbelief, excitement, and fear. "Why would you invest in two elderly women with a kitchen operation?" I finally managed to ask, my voice betraying both incredulity and vulnerability. He smiled, a calm, assured smile that seemed to carry a quiet understanding of the world. "Because," he said slowly, thoughtfully, "the best entrepreneurs often come from the most unexpected places. Passion, commitment, and care. These are far more powerful than age or background. I've seen it too many times to ignore it now." I felt a shiver run through me, a mix of hope and fear, a tremor that echoed through my chest and reminded me of the life I had been too hesitant to pursue fully. This was opportunity, but also responsibility. Everything I had worked for in the last few months, the long nights of mixing, pouring, and tying, had led to this moment. This man seeing potential where others, like Richard, had only seen frivolity. A few days later, we met at a small sunlit cafe downtown. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee beans, pastries, and the muted buzz of conversation from other patrons, yet I could feel the gravity of what was about to happen pressing gently around us. Michael sat across from Ruth and me, a laptop open beside him, a notebook brimming with charts and projections. The casual setting made it seem less intimidating, but my heart was racing nonetheless. He laid out his offer with quiet confidence, $150,000 for a 30% stake in our company, with one clear condition. We had to be willing to learn everything about how to run a real business from the ground up. Profit margins, supply chains, marketing, branding, customer acquisition, nothing would be held back. The learning curve would be steep, the stakes high, and yet I felt a thrill in the challenge. Ruth squeezed my hand under the table, a small anchor, a reassurance that we were in this together. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, feeling a swell of courage that had been dormant for far too long. "We accept," I said finally, my voice soft but unwavering. The words felt like a reclamation of self, a declaration that our lives were no longer defined by dismissal or doubt. As we left the cafe, I felt the weight of the world lighten slightly, replaced by the buoyancy of possibility. For the first time, our dreams felt tangible, achievable, and guided by someone who saw our worth, even before we fully recognized it ourselves. The road ahead was uncertain, daunting even, but I felt ready. For the first time in years, I felt capable of stepping into a future we had the power to shape. And as Ruth and I walked back into the busy streets of Chicago, hand in hand, a quiet laughter escaped us, light, joyous, and irrepressible. It was the sound of possibility, of resilience, and of a dream taking its first deliberate steps toward reality. Michael became our guide into the intricate, intimidating world of business, and from the very first meeting, it was clear that this journey would demand more from us than just enthusiasm or a love for soap making. We met 3 times a week, often in his office or at a quiet cafe, poring over spreadsheets, discussing markets, and analyzing customer trends. The concepts were foreign at first: profit margins, cost of goods sold, brand positioning, marketing funnels. But Michael had a way of making each lesson feel vital, personal, and achievable. He spoke with a calm authority that didn't intimidate but inspired, nudging us to see beyond the immediate and to embrace the broader strategic picture. "Business isn't just about making good products," he said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair, hands folded on the table. "It's about understanding markets, timing, and human psychology. You can have the most perfect soap in the world, but if it doesn't reach the right people at the right time, it will sit on the shelf." His eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. And the truth is, Lisa, the best entrepreneurs anticipate needs before customers even know they have them. I nodded, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. Could I really learn this? Could Ruth and I rise beyond the small kitchen table we had begun with and navigate the high-stakes world of commerce? But beneath the nerves, a spark ignited, one I hadn't felt in decades. It was the excitement of learning, of growing, of proving to myself that age was not a limitation, only a context. Back home, Ruth and I transformed my modest kitchen into a study center. We stayed up late into the night, the soft hum of the refrigerator our companion as we pored over business books, scribbled notes, and practiced mock presentations. The scent of lavender soap mingled with the aroma of coffee, a comforting reminder of where we had started. Every page turned, every financial concept mastered, felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant for far too long. As our understanding deepened, the limitations of my kitchen became painfully apparent. Michael helped us secure a small rented facility, a modest but bright space where we could scale our operations without feeling confined. For the first time, I experienced the exhilaration of movement, of pouring, mixing, and packaging in a space that was ours entirely, not a makeshift corner commandeered from domestic life. The walls, bare and unadorned, seemed to echo with possibility. It was there that Michael introduced us to Sophia, a marketing expert with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded attention. Her first words were blunt, almost harsh. "Your branding is amateur," she said, scanning our packaging and labels with a critical gaze. "It's charming, but it's limiting your growth. You have to choose. Do you want to stay quaint, or do you want to grow?" Ruth and I exchanged a glance, the silent conversation between us charged with a mix of fear and determination. We had both been dismissed, underestimated, laughed at. Now, here was an opportunity to step into a larger world, to prove not just to ourselves, but to everyone who had doubted us that we were capable. "We choose growth," I said firmly, my voice trembling slightly with anticipation and fear. The words felt like a declaration, a statement of intent that reverberated through the small facility and into my heart. The following weeks were intense. Michael's mentorship was rigorous, demanding, and profoundly transformative. We learned to read profit and loss statements, analyze market trends, and understand customer behavior. Ruth excelled at logistics and operations, while I found my strength in creativity, quality control, and connecting with customers. Our partnership deepened, threaded with trust, respect, and shared vulnerability. Each success, no matter how small, felt monumental. Each mistake became a lesson rather than a failure. One evening, as I hunched over spreadsheets late into the night, the soft glow of my laptop illuminating my face, Richard walked into the room. His presence startled me, but I didn't flinch. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "What is all this?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief and scorn. "Business projections," I replied calmly, keeping my voice even, steady, unafraid. He scoffed, shaking his head. "Lisa, you don't even know what a P&L statement is." A small, fierce smile crept onto my lips. I didn't tell him that I knew exactly what a P&L statement was now, that our numbers were promising, solid, and growing. I didn't tell him that the very thing he used to diminish me, the perception that I was inexperienced, unskilled, and insignificant, was now obsolete. That fire, once dormant, burned quietly inside me, fed by months of effort, learning, and quiet victories. Ruth peeked her head around the doorway, a mischievous grin tugging at her lips. "Looks like you're finally taking this seriously," she whispered. I shot her a glance, a mix of gratitude and shared defiance. We were not just making soap anymore. We were building a foundation, a future, a proof of what women of our age, experience, and passion could achieve when given knowledge, guidance, and trust. In those late-night sessions, I felt the old fear of invisibility melt away. The humiliation Richard had inflicted months ago, his dismissive laughter and cold words, no longer held power over me. Instead, they had been transformed into resolve, determination, and confidence. I could feel the contours of a new life shaping themselves around me, brick by brick, lesson by lesson, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. Each day, the space around us felt more like home, more like a workshop of possibility. The air carried the mingled sense of lavender and opportunity, of resilience and ambition. Our voices, once tentative and unsure, grew stronger, steadier, infused with conviction and pride. Michael guided us with patience. Sophia challenged us with precision, and Ruth shared every triumph and stumble with a quiet humor that lightened the weight of long hours and endless calculations. For the first time in years, I felt capable of more than survival. I felt alive. I felt seen, not by Richard, whose judgment now seemed irrelevant, but by the truth of my own capabilities, by the proof in the results of hard work and dedication, and by the eyes of a mentor who believed in what we could become. The education was more than about business. It was a reclamation of self, a renaissance of hope, courage, and vision. And as I closed my laptop that night, stretching sore fingers and tired eyes, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and demanding, but for the first time in decades, I was ready to walk it with confidence. Not for Richard, not for anyone else, for me, for Ruth, for the life we were determined to build from our kitchen into something extraordinary. 4 months after Michael first became our mentor, I remember the morning vividly, the sunlight spilling through the blinds, dust motes dancing in the warm rays, and the quiet anticipation that made my heart pound with every passing second. Ruth had just arrived, her cheeks flushed with excitement from the brisk walk up my street, her arms carrying a thermos of coffee and a notebook stuffed with ideas. We were immersed in finalizing orders for an upcoming weekend market, the familiar rhythm of weighing, cutting, and labeling soaps providing a comforting background hum. Then the email arrived. I saw it first, a subtle ping in my inbox, but even before opening it, I felt the flutter of hope. With trembling hands, I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the text, each word striking me like a jolt of electricity. Whole Foods wanted to test our products in 50 of their Midwest stores. The reality sank in slowly, like sunlight breaking through a winter morning fog, until I could barely breathe from excitement and disbelief. "Ruth," I whispered, voice trembling. I had to sit down, clutching the edge of the counter. "Whole Foods. They want to carry our soaps." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she just stared, hands hovering over the counter as if afraid to touch anything, afraid that this fragile dream would shatter if she did. Then tears sprang to her eyes, and she threw her arms around me. "We did it, Lisa! We actually did it!" Her voice cracked, a mixture of joy and relief so pure it made my own tears spill over. We laughed and cried together, the kitchen suddenly alive with warmth, energy, and disbelief. The test period was nerve-wracking. Every day brought anxious calls from store managers, questions about shipments, and feedback from customers who might reject our small, handmade products for the glossy, mass-produced alternatives lining the shelves. But the results astounded us. Whole Foods wanted to expand our line into 200 stores nationwide. Our monthly revenue, which had once felt like a distant dream, jumped to $85,000. I remember staring at the numbers in disbelief, my hands trembling as if I could physically hold the proof of all our hard work, of every late night and anxious morning in my grasp. We quickly hired 3 employees to help manage the growing operation. The small facility we had rented transformed into a hive of activity. There was laughter, chaos, and the constant scent of soap mingled with the sharp tang of industrial-strength cleaning supplies. Days blurred into nights, 12-hour shifts fueled by endless cups of coffee, adrenaline, and the intoxicating sense that we were building something truly remarkable. Ruth and I often found ourselves laughing at our own exhaustion, sharing silent, knowing looks that carried the weight of shared sacrifice and triumph. Michael visited one afternoon, watching us navigate orders, inventory, and client calls with efficiency and surprising calm. He smiled broadly, pride shining in his eyes. "You're learning faster than people half your age," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I've never seen such determination and attention to detail. You two are remarkable." His praise was a balm to my soul, validating every hour spent studying, every spreadsheet painstakingly analyzed, and every small victory we had celebrated quietly in our kitchen. And then, the first real challenge appeared. Sophia, our marketing expert, called me into her office with a tense expression, her brows drawn together in concern. "Lisa, you need to see this," she said, sliding her laptop across the desk. I looked down at the screen and froze. There, staring back at me in glossy product photos and neatly designed packaging, was Pure Essence, a competitor whose soaps were almost identical to ours in formula, scent, and even packaging style. I felt a cold, sinking jolt in my chest. My stomach turned over as my mind raced to make sense of it. Could this really be happening? Was this just coincidence? Ruth arrived, breathless, her eyes wide as she scanned the screen beside me. "It's uncanny," she whispered, voice trembling. "Every detail. It's almost like they copied us." The investigation began immediately. We dug through public records, supplier lists, and trade information, our hands shaking not from physical exertion, but from the anxiety that coiled tightly around our hearts. And then we found it, a link so direct it made our stomachs drop. Pure Essence was being manufactured by a firm owned by Gordon Hewitt, Richard's main business partner. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. the bitter taste of betrayal rising in my throat. Ruth put a comforting hand on my shoulder, but I felt paralyzed by the enormity of it. "It's too close to be coincidence," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I nodded, swallowing hard, tears threatening to spill not from sadness, but from the raw, searing anger that surged through me. The very people who had dismissed, belittled, and underestimated me were now actively undermining what Ruth and I had worked so hard to build. The kitchen, once our sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. I stood frozen for a long moment, staring at our modest soaps neatly arranged on the table, each bar a testament to care, resilience, and hope. How could they try to steal that? How could someone I had known all my life, partner in our social circles and our community, betray us like this? The sense of injustice and violation made my hands shake. And yet, even amid the shock and anger, a spark of clarity ignited within me. This was not the moment to crumble. This was the moment to rise, to channel every ounce of energy, intelligence, and passion we had cultivated over the past months into strategy, into action, into proving that the soul behind our products, our heart, our care, our dedication, could not be replicated. I took a deep breath, feeling the steadying weight of Ruth's hand in mine. "We're not going to back down," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "We'll fight this the right way, with integrity, and we'll make sure the world knows our story." Ruth nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, a mixture of anger, fear, and determination. "We've come too far to let them take this from us," she said. That night, I stayed in the facility long after the employees had left, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the rows of soaps. I thought about how far we had come, from a small kitchen in my home, dismissed and underestimated, to this moment of both triumph and challenge. The numbers, the recognition, the validation, it all mattered, but it was the strength we had discovered within ourselves that truly defined us. As I locked the doors and turned off the lights, a quiet resolve settled in my chest. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, betrayals, and unforeseen challenges. But now I knew with certainty that Ruth and I were no longer two small fish in a vast ocean. We were forces to be reckoned with, armed with knowledge, passion, and the unshakable bond forged through shared struggle. And in that quiet, empty facility, I whispered to myself, feeling the energy of months of labor and dreams coalesce around me. We were ready to rise, ready to fight. Ready to turn this breakthrough into a movement, a testament, a triumph that no one could steal, not even the people who had once laughed at us. Despite the shock of discovering pure essence, Ruth and I refused to be intimidated. If anything, the betrayal ignited a fiercer determination in both of us. I remember that morning vividly, sunlight streaming through the windows of our small facility, as Ruth and I huddled over our spreadsheets, whispering strategies and possibilities. Michael had arrived earlier, carrying a folder of investor proposals, his calm energy filling the space like a steady tide against the storm of our anxiety. "Lisa, Ruth," he said, his voice both gentle and commanding. "You've built something remarkable here. People see it, and they're willing to support it. We can secure $500,000 in additional funding, but it will require courage and clarity. Investors want to know you're not just chasing numbers. They want to see your purpose, your vision, your integrity." I swallowed, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. Ruth reached over, squeezing my hand. "We've come too far to let fear decide for us," she said, her voice low but resolute. It was more than courage. It was a shared understanding, a bond that had grown through every late night, every mistake, every small victory in the kitchen. Michael guided us through the investor meetings with patience and precision. Each session was intense, filled with questions about growth, projections, and scalability. But with every answer, every explanation, I felt a growing sense of confidence. The voice of doubt, the lingering whispers of Richard's condescension, began to fade. It was replaced by a steadier, surer feeling. I was capable, I was prepared, and I had Ruth and Michael alongside me. By the end of the week, the funding was secured. The additional $500,000 would allow us to expand our operations, invest in higher quality ingredients, and begin professional marketing campaigns. It felt surreal, almost impossible, that we had come so far in such a short time. With the infusion of capital, we grew rapidly. Our team expanded to 15 people, many of whom were women over 50. Women who, like me, had once felt invisible, dismissed, or underestimated. I remember hiring Margaret, a retired accountant who had once been told she was too old for the modern workforce, and Jean, a former teacher who had spent years caring for family, quietly yearning for something of her own. Each new hire brought not just skill, but a shared sense of determination and solidarity. One afternoon, as we reviewed production schedules and marketing strategies, Ruth turned to me, her eyes glistening with quiet emotion. "Lisa," she said, "we're not just building a business. We're proving something. We're showing them and ourselves that life doesn't end at 50. That experience, wisdom, and persistence matter more than youth and arrogance." Her words sank deeply into me, stirring a mix of pride, gratitude, and awe. I realized she was right. Every soap bar we produced, every customer we served was a testament to resilience, courage, and the quiet power of overlooked voices. Our monthly revenue soared to $150,000, a number that still made my hands shake with disbelief when I saw it in our reports. But throughout it all, I kept the full scale of our success from Richard. To him, it remained a little soap hobby, a quaint pastime unworthy of attention. Every time he dismissed me, I felt a surge of quiet defiance, a small, private victory in knowing that our work spoke for itself, even if he refused to see it. One evening, as I was finishing up orders and Ruth was organizing packaging materials, Richard burst through the door, his excitement palpable, almost brash. "Lisa," he announced, his voice booming through the facility, startling everyone. "I'm organizing the annual Entrepreneur Awards next month. All the top business people in the state will be there. Gordon is even being honored." I paused, carefully folding a stack of labeled soaps, forcing my hands to stop trembling as I swallowed the tight knot of unease rising in my chest. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with pride, or perhaps condescension, I couldn't tell. Then, with a deliberately patronizing smile, he added, "Of course, you're not invited. It's for business people only." The words stung sharply, slicing into a part of me I thought I had fortified. I felt the old familiar flash of humiliation, the bitter sting of being underestimated and dismissed. But this time, I refused to let it control me. I lifted my chin and smiled, tight but controlled. "Of course, Richard." "I understand," I replied, my voice calm, measured, and unflinching. What he did not know, of course, was that my own invitation had arrived a week ago. I had received it quietly, tucked among the mail, my heart swelling with both pride and a little mischief. We had been nominated, Soulful Suds, Ruth and I, Emerging Business of the Year. The realization was intoxicating. For weeks, we had poured our hearts, our souls, and our sweat into this company, and now the world was taking notice. The recognition was more than a validation of our business acumen. It was proof that courage, integrity, and relentless effort could overcome years of doubt, dismissal, and underestimation. That evening, as I recounted the invitation to Ruth in whispers across the production floor, she threw her arms around me, laughter and tears mingling in a beautiful symphony of emotion. "Can you believe it?" she whispered, voice trembling. "We're going to that gala. They're going to see us." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me, a quiet, fierce satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or prestige and everything to do with reclaiming our power and self-respect. We had built something larger than soap. We had built proof of our resilience, our vision, and our unwavering belief in ourselves. In the quiet moments that followed, as I walked through the facility, observing our team at work, I felt a sense of profound gratitude. Each person, each soap, each painstaking decision had contributed to this moment. Richard might still dismiss me, might still believe he could define my limits, but I knew the truth. The truth was that Soulful Suds and the women who had brought it to life were unstoppable. And in that moment, I allowed myself to imagine the gala, to picture the proud smiles, the applause, the recognition that would finally reflect what Ruth and I had always known, that life's second act could be brighter, bolder, and more extraordinary than anyone had dared to believe. 2 weeks before the gala, I was in the middle of reviewing shipping schedules when my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, but the urgency in his voice when I answered froze me instantly. "Lisa," he said, and I could hear the tension vibrating in every word. "I've been investigating Gordon's company, the one copying your products. There's something you need to know. Something serious." I felt my chest tighten, a sudden coldness replacing the warmth of the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though every instinct screamed at me to brace for something terrible. "Lisa," he said, and there was a gravity to his tone that made my stomach twist. "Richard isn't just Gordon's partner. He's a 40% silent investor in Pure Essence. He has been funding your competitor from the very beginning." The words hit me like a physical blow. My lungs seemed to empty, leaving me dizzy and hollow. Richard, my husband, the man I had shared decades of my life with. He had not just been dismissive, not just indifferent. He had actively worked against me, against Ruth, against the company that had become the heartbeat of my revival. My chest ached with a mixture of disbelief, grief, and a rage that burned so fiercely it threatened to consume me entirely. I sat down abruptly, my fingers gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. "Michael," I whispered, voice trembling. "Why?" "There isn't a simple answer," he said quietly, almost gently. "But the evidence is clear. He invested in Pure Essence intentionally, to undercut you, to sabotage the success you've built from nothing. It's personal." I remember closing my eyes, trying to steady my shaking hands, feeling the floor beneath me as if it might crumble and reveal a world where nothing was as it seemed. 2 decades of marriage, 35 years, and I had never known that the man I trusted most could harbor such calculated malice. When I told Ruth, her reaction was immediate and visceral. Her hands shook with anger as she paced back and forth, her voice rising in sharp, fiery bursts. "Lisa, we have to confront him now. We can't let him get away with this." Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with indignation and protective loyalty. I held up my hands, trying to calm the storm of her emotions. "No," I said, my voice cold but steady, the resolve in it surprising even me. "We're not going to fight this with anger. We're going to win the right way, with proof, with integrity, with our heads held high." The words carried a weight I hadn't expected. They were not just a promise to Ruth, but a promise to myself, a declaration that I would not let betrayal dictate the end of this story. Over the next several days, Michael became both a strategist and a shield. Together, we gathered every shred of evidence, poring over bank statements, investment documents, and emails exchanged between Richard and Gordon. Each message was more damning than the last, dripping with mockery and contempt. "The old lady's folly," they referred to us, laughing at our efforts and plotting to buy our company cheaply once they believed we would fail. Every word was a twist of the knife, every plan a testament to their underestimation of Ruth and me. I remember sitting alone in the facility late one night, surrounded by stacks of papers and spreadsheets, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. I held a letter from one of the investors in my hands, shaking, my eyes swimming with tears. I could feel the betrayal in every fiber of my being, the sting of decades-long trust shattered in an instant. Yet, beneath the shock and grief, there was a flicker, a spark of something more profound. It was clarity. It was focus. It was the undeniable recognition that this was not just about revenge, not just about humiliation. This was about asserting the truth, claiming the respect and recognition we had earned through sweat, passion, and unrelenting perseverance. The anger that had initially threatened to consume me transformed into purpose. I would channel it, harness it, and mold it into a force that could not be ignored. Ruth found me hours later, eyes red and voice trembling, but her hand found mine, and the shared squeeze carried a silent vow. "We'll make them see, Lisa. We'll make them all see what we built." I nodded, swallowing hard, feeling a lump of determination grow heavy and solid in my chest. Over the following days, Michael helped us organize the evidence into a coherent, undeniable narrative. Emails were printed and annotated, financial documents compiled and cross-referenced, every link between Richard, Gordon, and Pure Essence meticulously documented. The work was exhausting, emotionally draining, and yet strangely cathartic. With each page, each fact, each undeniable truth laid bare, I felt a renewed sense of control, a reclaiming of the power that had been undermined for so long. At night, when the facility quieted and the remaining staff had gone home, Ruth and I would sit among the neatly stacked soaps, their gentle lavender scent filling the room, and talk quietly about the upcoming gala. It became a ritual of reflection and strategy, of sharing fears and hopes, and of allowing ourselves a private moment to grieve what had been lost while celebrating what we had built. I remember one night in particular, as the city lights glimmered beyond our windows, leaning back in my chair and letting the weight of everything settle around me. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty room, almost as if confessing to the air itself. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. We will rise. We will show them. We will do it with integrity. And we will triumph, not by breaking, but by building what they can never take from us." That resolve hardened within me, a quiet, burning certainty that the gala would not be merely a night of recognition. It would be the stage upon which every ounce of our effort, courage, and passion would finally be visible to the world. And for the first time in days, I slept with a sense of calm determination, knowing that we were prepared not just to face Richard's betrayal, but to transform it into a story of victory, dignity, and the unshakable power of women who refuse to be underestimated. The night of the annual Entrepreneur Awards began with a quiet hum of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the marble floors and glittering chandeliers of the grand ballroom. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, reflecting the promise of a night that would be unforgettable, not just for the accolades, but for the journey that had led me here. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel suite, a soft breath trembling in my lungs. Professional hair and makeup had transformed me, the skilled hands of the stylists framing my face and softening decades of worry and doubt into an elegant, confident presentation. The emerald green gown I had chosen hugged my frame gracefully, the fabric catching the light with every subtle movement. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman in the reflection, powerful, composed, and fully present. The Lisa who had once hesitated in her own kitchen, shrinking under Richard's dismissive gaze, had grown into someone ready to claim her place. I inhaled deeply, letting the scent of lavender perfume mingle with the faint memory of the soaps that had begun this journey. That aroma had once been a simple hobby in a sunlit kitchen. Now, it was the foundation of a business that had changed not just my life, but the lives of Ruth, our team, and countless customers. I felt a pulse of gratitude, a warm, fierce energy that filled every inch of me. Ruth's voice echoed in my memory, reminding me that this wasn't just about recognition. It was about proving that resilience, integrity, and unwavering belief in oneself could transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. I arrived at the grand ballroom early, the velvet ropes parting for me as I stepped into a world of soft golden light, murmuring conversations, and the quiet click of heels against polished floors. I moved deliberately, my posture tall, shoulders back, exuding the quiet confidence that had been cultivated over months of study, sleepless nights, and tireless effort. I navigated the room, introducing myself to other business leaders with warmth and authenticity, letting our story slip naturally into conversation. Small victories, heartfelt struggles, and the joy of creating something meaningful. The smiles I received, the nods of understanding and respect, felt like a balm to all the years of doubt I had endured. Hours passed in a blur of introductions and soft laughter. Then, as if the universe were holding its breath, Richard and Gordon arrived. Both men looked impeccable in their tailored tuxedos, the kind of perfection that had once intimidated me, that had made me doubt my place. Richard's eyes scanned the room, his gaze sharp and searching. I could feel his pride radiating even from across the room, a pride that had never included me until tonight. He walked with Gordon toward their assigned table, completely unaware that the woman he had dismissed, the little hobbyist he had mocked, was already seated, poised, and ready. The ceremony began with the presentation of awards for established leaders. Applause filled the room, but my attention was partially diverted to the table where Richard and Gordon sat. Gordon received an award for Veteran Business Leader, and Richard's smile was broad, his chest swelling with pride as he leaned back in his chair. The contrast between the two of them, the practiced, familiar tableau of privilege and expectation, and the life I had carved from scratch, could not have been more stark. I felt a surge of quiet triumph, a deep, satisfying vindication that had nothing to do with arrogance or malice, only truth. And then, the moment arrived, the category that would change everything. The announcer stepped forward, his voice rich and confident. Emerging Business of the Year. The lights dimmed slightly, and the massive screens flared to life, illuminating the room with the names of the nominees. I felt my pulse quicken as I saw our company appear in bold letters. Soulful Suds, founded by Lisa Morrison and Ruth Patterson. A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on Richard. At first, his smile faltered. There was a slight twitch of confusion in his eyes, a subtle shift in posture that I recognized instantly. His gaze darted around, searching, trying to reconcile the name on the screen with the woman he had so casually dismissed. I felt the slow, exquisite unfolding of shock spread across his face. His mouth opened slightly, disbelief etched into every line, every tense movement. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow. I could see every tiny micro-expression, every flicker of realization, the recognition that the person he had underestimated, the old hobbyist, had not only survived his mockery, but had risen far beyond his imagination. There was astonishment, incredulity, and finally, the unmistakable flush of humiliation. I didn't smile in glee. I allowed the weight of our journey, the countless hours of work, the sweat, tears, and quiet defiance, to radiate from me naturally. No words were necessary yet. The world had already spoken through our accomplishments. Around me, the audience began to murmur with excitement, the recognition spreading like warmth across the room. People leaned forward, eyes scanning the screen, trying to take in the name of a company they had perhaps never heard of, but that now demanded attention. The air was thick with anticipation, a collective inhale as the announcer prepared to declare the winner. I took a breath, steadying the tremor in my chest, feeling the familiar pulse of adrenaline mingling with pride. Ruth, seated just behind me, squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with quiet tears. I returned the gesture, letting her know wordlessly that we had arrived, that our labor, our courage, and our unwavering belief had culminated in this moment. Richard's disbelief grew more pronounced. I could see his hands clenching involuntarily, the rigid line of his jaw tightening. Every gesture he made seemed to betray a silent question. How? How did this happen? And I allowed myself to feel the subtle, almost imperceptible satisfaction of knowing that he would never be able to dismiss me again, that his own pride was now confronted by the undeniable evidence of my success. I shifted slightly, inhaling the scent of the room, the faint aroma of polished wood mingling with the floral arrangements, and felt a deep, quiet gratitude. This was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to Ruth, to Michael, to the women on our team who had been overlooked, underestimated, and yet had given everything to build something meaningful. It was a recognition of perseverance, courage, and the transformative power of believing in oneself, even when others refused to believe. As the announcer paused, the hush in the room almost palpable, I allowed myself one final glance at Richard. His eyes were wide, uncomprehending, a mirror of the shock and awe that had taken root throughout the audience. And in that moment, I realized that victory was not simply the award, the applause, or the recognition. It was the journey itself, the rise from invisibility to empowerment, from doubt to undeniable truth. And the winner is Soulful Suds. The announcer's voice echoed through the grand ballroom, reverberating off the crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. A tidal wave of applause erupted, filling every corner of the room. I could hear the rustle of astonished murmurs and the excited exclamations of business leaders who had come expecting familiarity and tradition. Ruth and I moved toward the stage, our hands brushing occasionally in a silent affirmation of all we had endured to get here. Each step felt surreal, yet grounding, as if the universe had pressed its own approval on the months of effort, struggle, and quiet determination we had invested in this journey. Richard was already on his feet, his tall frame rigid with disbelief. His mouth hung open slightly, eyes wide, and for the first time in decades, I saw a vulnerability in him that he had never allowed anyone to witness. He looked as though someone had punched him in the chest, the pride he had so carefully cultivated around his business persona crumbling in real time. I felt a quiet satisfaction, but it was tempered by the memory of all the years of subtle dismissals, cutting remarks, and invisible barriers he had built between us. This moment was not about revenge. It was about truth, clarity, and reclaiming my own life. I gripped the microphone, feeling the cool metal against my palms, and realized that my hands were steady, unshaking. A deep inhale filled my lungs, and I allowed the emotions of the past months, the fear, the hope, the anguish, and the triumph, to converge into a single clear voice. "Thank you," I began, my tone deliberate, firm, and resonant. The room fell into a hush, a collective pause that made every heartbeat feel magnified. 6 months ago, my husband told me I would embarrass him if I attended a business dinner because, in his words, I knew nothing about business. I could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes, a shadow crossing the confident facade he wore for the world. The audience leaned in, the weight of the story settling around us like a gentle, expectant hush. He was right. I didn't know about business then, I admitted, letting the truth land in the room. But I knew about hard work, about creating something with love and integrity, and about treating people with respect. Those values guided every step of what you see today. Richard's face had shifted, the deepening red a testament to the creeping realization of how wrong he had been. His rigid posture softened slightly, but it was replaced by a helpless tension, the kind that comes when control is stripped away. I locked eyes with him, allowing the shared history of our decades together, the love, the disappointment, and the betrayal, to ripple through that gaze. With my partner Ruth and our mentor, Michael Chen, we built Soulful Suds from my kitchen into a company that has generated $1 million in revenue. A collective gasp ran through the audience, a mixture of admiration and disbelief. I could feel the energy of the room shift, the atmosphere thick with the recognition of what we had accomplished. There were murmurs of amazement, whispers of respect, and the quiet but palpable acknowledgement that this was a story of grit and transformation, not just numbers. I could see the faces of our team members, seated in the audience, their expressions awash with pride and emotional relief. The journey they had shared with us, the long hours, the learning curves, the shared laughter and tears, had culminated in this moment of undeniable achievement. I drew in a steadying breath, letting the intensity of the room settle around me before raising my voice slightly, carrying the words with a measured indignation. "But here's the most interesting part," I continued, allowing the pause to build suspense. The silence was almost tangible now, each listener holding their breath, sensing the gravity of what was about to be revealed. My husband, Richard Morrison, and his partner, Gordon Hewitt, who received an award tonight, invested $200,000 in a competitor designed specifically to copy our products and drive us out of business. The murmurs intensified, a ripple of shock spreading through the room like a wave. I could feel the collective intake of breath, the subtle shift of bodies leaning forward in disbelief. Richard's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his chair. His eyes darted around, almost searching for validation or escape. But there was none. The evidence was imminent, undeniable, and public. Michael, standing just off the stage, gave a subtle nod to the tech booth. The lights dimmed further, and the screens behind me flickered to life, illuminating the room with emails, bank statements, and documents that revealed the full extent of the betrayal. Comments mocking our company as the old lady's folly glared from the screen in stark black and white clarity. The audience gasped again, this time collectively, as they absorbed the audacity of the actions and the vindication of our triumph. Ruth's hand found mine, a grounding presence, as the crowd leaned closer, whispering among themselves. The sense of justice in that room was palpable, yet it was tempered by a deeper, more profound emotion: inspiration. I realized in that moment that this was more than personal victory. It was a statement to every woman who had ever been dismissed, every entrepreneur who had been underestimated, every person who had been told they were too late, too small, or too inexperienced to matter. Richard finally spoke, his voice a mixture of disbelief, shame, and anger. "Lisa, I didn't think you'd—" His words trailed off, unable to capture the enormity of what had been unveiled. I allowed a quiet, deliberate pause before responding, not in malice but in unwavering clarity. "You didn't just underestimate me, Richard," I said softly but firmly, letting each syllable land. "You betrayed me. You tried to sabotage the one thing that has given me back my voice, my confidence, and my life. But this," I gestured broadly to the screens, the audience, and the company name glowing behind me. "This is proof that integrity, perseverance, and belief in oneself can never be undermined by deceit." The applause began to rise again, louder this time, as the audience stood in recognition, some clapping, some cheering, some shaking their heads in awe. The collective energy of admiration and respect washed over me, a balm to the months of struggle, doubt, and quiet defiance. I looked around, absorbing the faces of those who had been touched by our story, who had witnessed not just a business success, but the triumph of resilience and human spirit. Richard remained rooted in disbelief, but it no longer mattered. His power over me, the subtle and cruel authority he had exercised for decades, had evaporated. I felt a surge of liberation, a quiet joy that had nothing to do with vengeance and everything to do with truth. Michael and Ruth joined me on stage, and together we accepted the applause, not as an ego-driven celebration, but as a shared acknowledgement of courage, hard work, and unwavering faith in the potential that had always existed within us. In that moment, I understood fully that the victory was not merely an award or the downfall of a betrayal. It was the reclamation of my own life, the transformation of pain into power, doubt into achievement, and invisibility into undeniable presence. And as the lights of the ballroom shimmered around us, I allowed myself to feel the catharsis of it all. the release, the exhilaration, and the quiet, profound peace of knowing I had not only survived, but I had risen, stronger and wiser in every sense of the word. The days after the gala unfolded like a storm, swift, merciless, and utterly transformative. Richard's world, once pristine and untouchable in its arrogance, began to fracture almost immediately. The news of his betrayal, his covert investment in the company meant to undermine me, spread through every business channel, every whisper in the state's corporate circles, and every eye that had once admired him. The same people who had nodded politely at his accomplishments now recoiled, shaking their heads at the audacity and immorality of his actions. In what felt like an instant, his carefully constructed reputation began to crumble. I watched the headlines while sitting in our office with Ruth, the words blurring together through the adrenaline and lingering disbelief of our triumph. Richard Morrison, the once vaunted businessman, was described in stark, unforgiving terms: unethical, duplicitous, manipulative. Investors began to pull out from his ventures as if repelled by his moral decay, leaving empty accounts and failed projects in their wake. I could almost feel the cold emptiness that must have spread through the walls of his office as one by one, the foundations he had built so carefully over decades began to collapse. Gordon Hewitt, too, faced immediate repercussions. The intellectual property lawsuit filed on behalf of Soulful Suds hit him with the full force of the law. His arrogance, which had always been a sharp edge of his personality, now turned against him in the cruelest way. Documents, emails, and evidence we had gathered, painstakingly detailed and perfectly timed, were presented in court, leaving his defense staggered and his credibility shattered. I felt no joy in seeing him struggle legally. Rather, it was the justice of truth finally being recognized, the validation of integrity over deceit. The morning after, Richard appeared at our doorstep, his posture slumped, his face pale and stripped of its usual self-assurance. I opened the door and met him there, the remnants of his pride crumbling before me. "Lisa, I didn't think you'd actually succeed," he stammered, words halting and fragile as if they were foreign to him. His voice, once commanding, now trembled under the weight of his defeat. I met his gaze calmly, my own strength a stark contrast to the uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "You didn't just underestimate me, Richard," I said softly, allowing the words to settle like stones in the air between us. "You betrayed me, and now you will face the consequences of your choices. I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." There was no malice in my tone, only the unshakable authority of a woman reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. In the months that followed, the transformation in my life was profound. I was no longer merely a divorcee. I had become the CEO of a thriving international company, a leader and a visionary. Soulful Suds grew exponentially, expanding to new markets, partnering with wellness brands, and reaching clients far beyond what I had once dared to imagine. The projections for the next year were staggering: $5 million in revenue, but it was more than numbers. Each success represented resilience, courage, and the unyielding belief that one is never too old, never too overlooked to begin anew. Ruth and I, of course, celebrated not only our business achievements, but the mission that had brought us here. Together, we established a foundation dedicated to teaching business skills to women over 50, creating a space where experience, wisdom, and perseverance were valued above societal expectations and ageist stereotypes. I watched countless women find their own second acts, their eyes lighting up with the same spark of hope and determination that had carried Ruth and me through our darkest and most uncertain moments. Every story of transformation we supported became a living affirmation of what we had built, not just a company, but a legacy of empowerment. One afternoon, I found myself in our new office, perched high above the city with glass walls that framed the skyline like a living painting. Ruth laughed beside me, holding a cup of tea, the sun glinting off her silver hair. "Remember when we were just making soap in your kitchen?" she said, a mixture of nostalgia and disbelief in her voice. I smiled, feeling a deep, steady warmth spread through me, the kind that comes when the weight of years of struggle finally lifts and leaves only clarity and peace. "I remember when I thought my life was over," I replied, letting the memory linger on my tongue, sweetened by triumph. "Turns out, it was just beginning." I leaned back in my chair, letting the city hum beneath us like a quiet witness to the lives we had changed and the journeys yet to come. In the stillness, I realized something I had only truly understood after months of learning, failing, and growing. True success is never about proving someone wrong. It's about discovering your own strength, embracing your own potential, and using that strength to lift others up alongside you. It's about integrity, compassion, and vision, about creating not just wealth, but opportunity and hope. Every sleepless night, every setback, every moment of self-doubt had led to this revelation. That empowerment is the ultimate triumph, and it multiplies when shared. The office door opened quietly, and a young woman from our foundation stepped in, her expression nervous but determined. "Ms. Lisa," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. Because of your work, I finally feel like I can start my own business. I never thought I'd have the courage." I felt my chest tighten, a familiar warmth of pride and emotion welling up, and I reached out to touch her hand. "Then you must," I said gently, "because the world is waiting for your ideas, your passion, and your gifts. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Not your age, not your circumstances, not anyone." Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder, and we exchanged a glance full of unspoken understanding. The journey that had begun in a tiny kitchen, with lavender-scented soaps and a flicker of rebellion against neglect, had blossomed into something far greater than either of us could have imagined. It was a life rewritten, a story reclaimed, and a beacon for others who were ready to embrace their own second acts. As the sun set behind the skyline, casting golden light across our office, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles, the betrayals, the heartbreaks, they had all led me here. I had not only rebuilt my life, I had built something lasting, something meaningful, something that lifted others as it had lifted me. And as I looked at Ruth, I laughed softly, a sound full of relief, joy, and quiet triumph. "We did it," I whispered. "We really did it." If you've been inspired by our journey, if you believe in resilience, second chances, and the power of discovering your own strength, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every story of courage and transformation deserves to be shared, and we have many more waiting to inspire you.